and we are joined by the voice of the Indiana Hoosiers, Don Fischer. As tonight, you can find Don at 7:05 along with Coach Mike Woodson at Southern Stone Restaurant for Inside Indiana Basketball. And it's going to be a hell of a week for that, Don. We'll get to that in a moment. First, though, over the weekend, Indiana and Purdue played football to wrap up the season, the Old Oaken Bucket, and in a game that started out tremendously for Indiana with Jalen Lucas doing what he does, getting loose for a big run, exciting the crowd. Indiana had a 7-3 lead. They're driving, and Dexter Williams goes down with a non-contact injury that looked bad, and he had to be ambulanced to the hospital. And it just such a boy, you talk about taking the wind out of your sails.
Well, there's no question. It was gut-wrenching, to say the least. It's so – I mean, I've been a part of Indiana football for 50 years now. I have seen these kinds of things take place just ad nauseum. It's ridiculous how many times negative things have happened to this program. But it looked like Indiana had the right game plan against Purdue, the right quarterback in there, and Dexter Williams, because he's got the dual threat capabilities with his legs and his arm. I think we were going to see a special game from Indiana in this context. I think the game plan was perfect, and how they had it set up. We were starting to get better play from the offensive line. But again, it's all predicated on that quarterback and his abilities to change things out there and how a defense gets ready to perform against that type of quarterback. And it just looked like the right game plan. Everything looked to be perfect in that sense. And Indiana was leading 7-3 at the end of the half, even though they lost extra at the end of the first quarter. And so you just like what you saw in that regard, but his absence the rest of the game obviously changed the whole picture, and Purdue played a totally different ball game than they had to adjust for because they went back to their normal thing, and their normal thing was plenty good enough to beat Indiana.
And I don't want to speculate, Don, because you never know how a game's going to turn out. You never know what changes are going to be made, but Purdue could not stop Indiana's offense. Jalen Lucas hit a home run play early in the game, but then on that second drive, you're talking about 12, 13 plays there at the 25, 26-yard line, and then Dexter Williams goes down. There's a good chance Indiana takes a 14-3 lead in that ball game. That's and right. Then all of a sudden, Indiana's defense is playing with a little more confidence. Purdue has a little bit more panic. Maybe they're thinking about the Big Ten West in the back of their mind. To still have opportunities to win that game, I did think Indiana had the right game plan. I thought Tom Allen sent the right message. The team played hard. But, man, you hate to put it all on one player, but I would like to see what that game looks like if Dexter Williams plays a full 60 minutes.
Well, that's what I think everybody felt exactly the same way. I mean, this kid proved himself against Michigan State and showed what he could do and what his abilities as a quarterback or that kind of quarterback can do to help your team. That, to me, is what we saw here at the end of the season. You've got to have a dual threat quarterback at Indiana because you're not going to get 5-star, 4-star offensive linemen. You're just not. You've got to develop those kids. We didn't see that with the previous coach, line coach. Obviously, we were all bellyaching about that for a couple of years. And I was probably bellyaching about that for about 3 years. But that's beside the point. What you saw there was how a dual threat quarterback can help your football team. And that's where Indiana is going to have to go, in my opinion, in the offseason, whether that's the Sorsby kid, who's just a freshman and came on campus, didn't have spring ball or anything like that, got thrown into the mix, in my opinion, wrongly in the game against, was it Penn State, I guess? So at any rate, from my perspective, Indiana has got to have a dual threat quarterback. Hopefully, Dexter Williams will come out of this thing and be able to come back next year and be that guy again. But if not, they've got to look at a quarterback that can do those kinds of things, and they've got to get one on campus that can do it.
And Don, I don't that begs the question, why? Why was Dexter Williams number 4 on the depth chart when he was obviously the most dynamic quarterback? When that change was made to go back to Connor Bazelak, it was like you took a dial and you turned it down 2 or 3 notches. You could just see the speed of the offense just regress back. And it was so mind-boggling. I'm like, going, how in the hell was he number 4 on the depth chart? This offense was dynamic with him in there. It was kind of one-dimensional, obviously with the run only, but it was pretty good because they have Jalen Lucas and Josh Henderson and Sean Shivers in addition to Dexter, who was causing problems for people. And the O-line had improved drastically under Rod Carey. So they were making so much it just makes you wonder. These are decisions that should have been made previously. That's the problem. The only problem I have is the successes they had were because decisions were not made prior to that.
Well, I think there were a lot of decisions this year that could be questioned. A lot, not just this one. There are others as well too, and I have questioned all along. You, Jim, have asked the question many press conferences about Josh Henderson and why he hasn't been, more of a factor. I will say this for Sean Shivers. The last 2 ball games of the season is the hardest I've seen him run all season long. And I still believe that the first play of the first game that Indiana played this year against Illinois, and Sean Shivers took his first snap as a Hoosier, and he absolutely got blasted.
Rocked.
I mean, just got hammered to the ground. He was not the same player we saw in fall practice sessions and the scrimmages leading up to the first game. He turned into a different player for 9 weeks of the season. I mean, it was amazing. And then all of a sudden, the last couple of weeks here, he starts running like I saw him in the fall practices and the scrimmages. So, but Josh Henderson all year long, I thought he was the one guy at running back that consistently was able to help this team move the football on the ground. And we just didn't see enough of him. I still think that there were mistakes made in wide receiving core. Anyway, long story short, Tom has a lot of work to do with this football team in the offseason to get things turned around. Whether it's scheme, whether it's, the coaches aren't good enough. We got 5 new coaches this year. That may be also a problem because you just keep changing coaches all the time. And part of these guys, it's not all Tom. It's some of these guys leave to go someplace else for better pay or whatever the case may be. So it's just not that. I mean, Indiana has a myriad of problems that they have got to solve if this program is to take off, and not the least of which is NIL and transfer portal stuff.
Boy, you hit 2 big ones there. On the basketball side of things, it is going to be an exciting week. Indiana has already, they've made it through so far undefeated, but now things get busy, they get real, and they get real fast. Of course, North Carolina coming in on Wednesday, losing a little of its luster with them losing back-to-back games. They lost in 4 overtimes to Alabama, but I don't know if that doesn't make them more dangerous because don't think that they're not a good team because of that. I promise you, this team is as good as the one you saw last year in the national championship. You have to remember, it's November. They've got a new piece in Pete Nance, and they've got to get things together as well. But hey, I thought Indiana was going to win the game prior to them losing that second game, just because. But don't think that North Carolina is going to be an easy game. I've seen so much comments that Indiana's going to run them out. Maybe they will, but don't count on that.
No, don't count on that at all. They've got 4 starters back from that team that went to the championship game last year, and Pete Nance has moved there from Northwestern. Gives them another 6'10", 6'11" guy that can go in there and do things. Now, I'm still not convinced that he is the guy that will end up being that guy in their lineup. I'm not convinced of that. I think he's a limited big man. I just don't think he's as good as some big guys, but he obviously played really well, I guess, leading up to that game against Iowa State. I didn't see that contest. I did see the Alabama game, a lot of it. And I didn't think he was much of a factor, but he got into foul trouble too. So Anyway, long story short, North Carolina is really good. And they're traveling back probably to Carolina for their couple of days to get in their own beds for a couple of days, and then they'll take off to come to Bloomington on Tuesday. It's going to be a challenge for this Indiana basketball team. Indiana's played only one game against a really top-flight competition at this point, and that's Xavier. And Xavier gave Gonzaga a big ball game yesterday before they fell by 4. So, again, Xavier is a really good basketball team, and Indiana was able to beat them at Xavier just by 2 points. So what are we looking at? We're looking at an Indiana basketball team that in many respects probably will go into this game favored now, especially after 2 North Carolina losses. And then on top of that, nobody's even thinking about this game. Then they play Rutgers on Saturday at Rutgers, a team that has had their number for the last 2 or 3 years now.
And it's turned into a little I don't know if I want to call it a rivalry, but a little chippiness with who was it, Ron Harper Jr. or whatever, when he was in the Assembly Hall last time, and now the funny thing is his brother is a recruiting target by Indiana, and I'm like, there's no way in hell he's coming to IU, but it's just funny. Let's see what else Don's got this week. Let's see the game on Wednesday, of course, which is a big one. And then, like you mentioned, then they go on the road, and then you follow that up with the trip to Las Vegas and Arizona. So it's going to be an important run for Indiana. The biggest thing is, Don, it's an opportunity for Indiana to put themselves back in the national spotlight.
Right.
Because I look at Seth Davis, he's got his new poll out. He's got Indiana at 16th, which that makes him a clown. Because I'm like, you know what? They're undefeated, Jack Legg. There's teams that have gotten run off the board that he's got in front of, which I don't care where they are. It's just that I look at it, I'm like going, but he's always kind of been that way in that regard. So, well, and rankings don't mean jack squat, but it just gives you an understanding of what other people think of you. And Indiana they're still looking at Indiana like with just a little bit. So this is going to be an opportunity for Indiana to do that.
Well, and here's the thing. That's justified too. Because Indiana hasn't finished higher than 9th place in the Big Ten in the last 6 years. So until this team proves that they belong, you're going to have the doubters, and I understand that. And so I don't have any problem with people not putting Indiana in the top 10 or those kinds of things. They can do what they want in that regard, because as you pointed out, it doesn't mean squat when it comes to what's really going on in college basketball. The rankings are all just for fans and to get clicks and all those kinds of things. At this point, your whole workload is done on the floor. And people can judge you in that regard, especially when you've got enough of the workload that you can take a look at. And at this point, Indiana hasn't had that much of a workload. So I say, hey, Indiana, don't worry about the rankings. Indiana, worry about what's going on the floor, especially against some of these better teams here coming up.
Yeah, go ahead, Dustin.
What's going to be really interesting to me, Don, is over these next 5 games, when you're playing such good competition, you got to go on the road and play in some tough environments, is going to be the depth. We saw on the road against Xavier, Trace Jackson Davis, Xavier Johnson were really the heart and soul of this team. I know Malik Renew came off the bench in that game and gave them quite a spark. But I think you are going to have to see just how good and how talented Indiana's depth is during this 5-game stretch. You cannot depend on just Trace Jackson Davis and Xavier Johnson and expect to go 5-0 or even maybe 3-2 against the competition you got coming up. So this is, I think, you can win a 1-game sample. You can win a 1 game with those 2 guys, but you cannot be very successful on a 5-game stretch like they've got coming up unless you get contributions from your bench and from some of those other guys. That's going to be really what I'm focused on here these next 5 games.
Yep. I mean, this is going to tell us a lot more about this basketball team. There's no doubt about that. And like I said, this week is interesting because you've got a team in North Carolina that can beat you because they are that good. And you got a team in Rutgers who has been beating you on a consistent basis of late. And they've had injury problems. Paul McKay, he hasn't played, I don't think, for at least 3 or 4 ball games now. Caleb McConnell's been hurt most of the season, and he's back. He played in their last ball game. That's two of their key pieces. With Omori, that's another critical player for them, and a big guy inside that can battle with Trace and with Race and whoever Indiana puts in there. So this is a really good Rutgers team and well-coached Rutgers team. Everybody knows what Steve Pikiell's been able to do at Rutgers is amazing. And so this will be another challenge coming up on the road for Indiana at Rutgers on Saturday. So this is a big week for this Indiana basketball team, no question.
And I don't want to get ahead of put the horse before the cart, but Purdue, how good did they look? I don't know if you had a chance to watch them, but speaking of Seth Davis, he moved them all the way to number 1 in his poll. But they are looking pretty damn good with some good, which we already knew they were going to have Mount Edie, but didn't know how the pieces around him were going to play. You've got a freshman in Braden Smith at point. He's playing pretty well. They're looking pretty good.
They've got a really good team, and if you look at their team and you look at Indiana's team, you're looking at two basketball teams that have depth. I mean, a lot of depth. I mean, Purdue's got just as much depth as Indiana does. I mean, they go 10, 11 guys deep. Indiana's doing the same thing right now. It may all change as you move forward and you get into tougher games on a consistent basis, that kind of thing. But, man, Purdue is just playing lights out, and a lot of people didn't expect that. I am one of those people who always thinks that if you're coached by Matt Painter, you're going to be in it. You're going to have to play your butt off to beat him, because that guy does a heck of a job developing players, and he gets talent that fits his system. Much like Wisconsin does, they get talent that fit their system, and every single year those guys are tough to deal with.